Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Let me share my screen and we'll get this show on the road. The first thing I'd like to say is it's really interesting. So when I look at the experiences that I have to share, I've not only lived in Africa, I've also lived in the diaspora. So I straddle both realities, so to speak. I also run a company that has a presence across 3 countries. So I'm also able to speak as an entrepreneur who has built businesses in different jurisdictions, different cultures, dealing with people from across divides. So I'm going to be sharing some personal experiences as I go through this presentation, as well as, obviously the technical information that some of you came here for. So in summary, anytime I introduce myself, obviously I talk about my credentials as a licensed fund manager across 2 jurisdictions. A lot of the work I've done as an entrepreneur, and a lot of you guys don't know that I've also been an intrapreneur. So I've worked for others for several years, built business units, built new products as an intrapreneur, and then I've started my businesses and run my businesses as an entrepreneur. So that's also another interesting business perspective that I can share. The experiences I learned from the corporate sector, and then also the gritty experiences I have as an entrepreneur. Been covered by quite a number of publications. Thankfully, a lot of that coverage was not for bad news, but for the work that I'm doing, championing middle-class wealth across Africa and the diaspora. Now, in talking about the myth of the wealthy diasporans, especially for some of you that your parents, your siblings, people back home are also saying, oh, send me urgent 2K. A lot of people just assume once you're in the diaspora, you're automatically wealthy. But the reality is, a lot of Africans in the diaspora are also struggling with realities. They're struggling with trying to create wealth in their new countries, in their new homes. But let's look at what the data tells us. So when you look at the data, the Indian Americans are the most successful diaspora group in the US. I'm going to use the US as a case study for this presentation. Now, one of the things you will quickly realize is that there is a correlation between education and wealth for the diaspora. So again, this stands to reason why a lot of African parents are always emphasizing education, particularly if you happen to relocate to another country. There's that emphasis: get your degree, get a certification, upgrade your skills, whatever it is, because there is a correlation between earning potential and education. And that's because a lot of countries in the West, forget what they say about socialism and all of that. There's a capitalist underbelly to a lot of Western countries. Businesses drive the economy. Without the businesses, you don't have the brands. Without the businesses, you don't have the export potential that brings in income into a country. So because of that, a lot of businesses need skilled corporate types, so to speak, to run the day-to-day engine of those organizations. And where do they get those skilled talents? A lot of times because the groups that are going to school, the groups that are getting those advanced degrees, the groups that are getting those certifications, those skills, a lot of times are the diasporans. So those diasporans directly feed the corporate sector in the West. So that's why there's a correlation between the income potential. Now, when you look at African Americans, they are the very bottom of the income potential, which is really sad. And we'll talk about a lot of the factors that have contributed to that. But when you look at Nigerian immigrants taken as a separate group, so if you don't lump Nigerian immigrants with Black Americans or people of African descent, you'll see that the average Nigerian immigrant earns twice as much as the African American and higher than the white American ethnic subgroup. And again, we see the correlation with education. 25% of Nigerian immigrants or their children have a PhD, master's, or an advanced degree. Now, let's look at the correlation between income and actual influence, because it's not enough to earn an income. What does that mean in terms of your influence within a community, or in terms of your wealth, your ability to accumulate assets within the community? Because income can be spent. You can spend your income on a Lamborghini. That doesn't mean you have assets and that you're wealthy. So when we look at wealth and influence across ethnic groups, again, I'm using the US as a case study, you see that in terms of wealth, Asian Americans, again, are at the top of the pile, followed by white Americans, then Hispanic Americans, and then finally people of African descent at the bottom of the pile. So when we begin to talk about the Africans and the diaspora, they've been in the West for a very long time. Immigration is not new. You know, people of African descent have been in different diaspora countries forever, but for some reason they've not been able to unlock wealth. They've not been able to unlock influence in the diaspora, and a lot of it is due to community. While the Asian Americans come together as a community, Hispanic Americans come together as a community, Africans are still Africaning. Our legacy problems of tribalism, ethnicity, we still carried those problems with us. So we're not able to come together as a community to represent our interests, whether in terms of business, whether in terms of wealth accumulation, whether in terms of political influence. It's still a problem. So when you think of the diaspora and you immediately assume that they are wealthy, a lot of times what you're doing is you're looking at individuals. So as individuals, you will find some very wealthy people of African descent, but as a community, we are not wealthy. It's a myth, and that's something that is very important and that we're going to have a discussion about today. Now, what are the challenges? What's stopping the diaspora from attaining wealth? There's some things that are very unique to us. So first of all, a lot of the recent brain drain in Africa is pretty recent. It hasn't gone on for a long time, obviously because a lot of the initial emigration was forced emigration through slavery. We didn't choose to emigrate. So voluntary emigration is actually quite new among people of African descent. And once we emigrate, we're dealing with trauma, we're dealing with culture shock, we're dealing with the need to develop new skills that may have been relevant in Africa, but are not relevant in the West. So for example, a typical African that emigrates as an adult is dealing with the culture shock. A lot of things that used to be hard in Africa. We come into a new country and we're thinking, wow, this is not that hard. Like it's just such a different paradigm. We're dealing with trust issues that we still have to overcome, once we get into a new culture. There's the issue of historical, cultural, and regulatory segregation for people of African descent, what a lot of people call unconscious bias. Poor financial literacy. So a lot of people of African descent are not as literate. So there are a lot of loopholes, a lot of benefits, a lot of things that they can take advantage of within the system, but because they don't know and they don't want to know, a lot of times we're struggling with financial literacy. So we can't accumulate wealth, we can't grow wealth. Limited access. Again, if you're going as an individual, you can't pool your funds together to access high value investment. So you'll always be limited to retail investment, which is the bottom of the pile for those who want to accumulate wealth rapidly. There's also the issue of black tax. We're supporting a lot of dependents, whether in country or back home. Few generational assets. We want to eat everything now. So we're not interested in passing on anything, to the next generation or even 5 generations, down the road. A lot of community division. Like I said, Africans think as tribes. We don't think as Africans. So the average African does not see himself necessarily as African. They see themselves based on their tribe, not even as, even within a country. The average African within their country identifies first as tribe before identifying as a member of the country. We only come together when there's a football match. Then we are all one nation. Once there's no football match, we go back to our tribal tendencies. And then finally, high consumption. We spend a lot of money on consumption instead of assets, and then emergency costs, funerals, healthcare bills. A lot of times we pay out of pocket for emergencies. So these are the issues. Another thing is that we're not able to distinguish it between wealth and entrepreneurship. So for a lot of people who are employed and middle class, you find out that they're only able to participate in what I call passive investment. So if it's mutual funds, index funds, real estate purchase, because that's what they know. If you don't have the financial literacy for anything more complicated, chances are you just go with what is traditional, what is popular, and also what won't take a lot of your time. Because once you begin to go into an investment that requires your time, that is no longer a passive investment. You've become an investment entrepreneur. So a lot of the time, because we don't have that time, to invest and to actively engage in investing, we're limited to a lot of the plain vanilla passive investments. Now, but what happens is when you look at the wealthier classes, whether the Indian Americans, Filipino Americans, the other ethnic groups, they focus on ownership and, what I like to call investment or entrepreneurship. They're actively investing. They're actively participating. They build trusts to protect their assets and to pass on those assets to the next generation. They invest in hedge funds, private equity. A lot of times when we think private equity, we think big, big private equity like BlackRock. But what a lot of people are doing are they're buying micro businesses, little businesses with cash flow. And we can discuss that at another forum. Active stock trading. Instead of just buying real estate, they're pursuing real estate commissions, rent, finance. They not only develop the real estate, they finance, the real estate and keep all of that value, within. So it's a different paradigm. But I find that a lot of diasporans, people of African descent, we tend to focus on just plain vanilla. We buy, a house, we buy land, mutual funds, index funds. And again, it's simply just the problem of financial literacy and access. A lot of times we don't even know what's going on the other side. We don't know what's going on with hedge funds, private equities, like what is that? So it's almost like a vicious cycle where you're limited by knowledge, you're limited by access, you're limited by capital because you don't like each other and you don't want to come together as a community to pool your funds. So it's just a lot that's going on. And at the end of the day, a typical African or diasporan of African descent remains middle class till they die. They're just trapped, within that bubble. Now, Kola is going to talk a lot about alternative investing and how that is the unlocking key for the middle class, where we look at non-traditional assets with hidden opportunity, real estate, art, private equity, commodities. And he's going to explain a model where the middle class can come together as one community and access a lot of these assets that have previously been reserved for the ultra-rich and institutions. He's going to spend time, telling you how the middle class can participate in alternative investing. So I'm not going to talk too much about this. Community. We need to grow as a community, and it's simply because we need to pool capital. We don't need to like each other. We just need to like the color of each other's money. We need to come together as a community, because without a community, you will never have the kind of capital to do a real estate development, for example. You'll always be limited to buying a house. you will never build an estate simply because you don't have the capital and you've not pulled that capital together with a community. So if you want to create wealth, if you want to accelerate wealth, think community, don't think individual. And then finally, you need the expertise and the corporate governance. One of the things we do in our investment club, we have an investment club of about 3,000 members. We put a fund manager in the middle because we need that expertise and that corporate governance to create wealth, and also to serve as an honest arbiter, because if you have 3,000 strangers in a room, you need an honest arbiter. So we put a fund manager in the middle such that we have the expertise and we have the corporate governance that is required to pool funds and invest as a community as opposed to investing as individuals. So if we really want to accelerate middle class wealth, we need alternative investing. And a case study for us is what we did with the Black Book. Editi is going to talk about that. We launched the first private equity fund for African creatives through our investment club. We were not only the largest investors in the book, in the movie, but we've now expanded that to create, version 2, of our funds to invest across different creative projects in Africa. We would never have been able to do that without that community. And really, if there's one thing I need to leave with you today, if you want to participate in private equity, hedge funds, high value investing, real estate development, join a community. It could be our community, our investment club. It could be another investment club. It could be 10 of your friends, whatever it is. Come together as one community, build an investment club, pool your funds together, and then invest. Finally, if you're interested in version 2 of our African Creative Fund, it's open now. I'm sure Kola is going to talk a little bit about that. And it's our way of investing in African projects. The good news about the Black Book is that our community members invested in local currency and they're exiting in USD. So what alternative investing does is that it just gives you unique exits. You can really just customize your investment for your investment club's needs or your community's needs. So we're going to be talking a little bit about VIMA 2. Kola is going to break down the structure, how it works, what sort of projects we're investing in across Africa. But I'll leave this with you. In summary, community, higher value investments, and then have an honest arbiter, preferably a licensed fund manager in the middle of your investment club or your investment community. And I'll just leave my contacts here for those who want to book a call with me or send me an email. If you have specific questions, if you want to talk about alternative investments, talk about our African Creative Fund, please feel free to just shoot me an email. My Calendly link is also there if you want to scan the QR code and just book a 15-minute call with me, and let's just talk about investing across the diaspora and investing across Africa. Thank you.